all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fossone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web. Veteransradio.org is our new URL, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We're going to cover two interesting stories today. One is we're going to talk to a young veteran who goes by the name of, or the handle maybe, of Millennial veteran, JENNA CARLTON, to give her view on a number of issues, which is kind of much different than the Vietnam era or even the early Gulf era. So I think this will be interesting for you. And then we're going to reach back and acknowledge that NATO is 75 years old and talk to a couple of representatives talking about whether or not is NATO still relevant. And is everybody in NATO doing their part? So that also will be an interesting discussion. So hang on. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Navy veteran JENNA CARLTON. JENNA, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're going to talk to JENNA. She is also known as the Millennial veteran. She is active on all sorts of different social media programs. Facebook, she has a group. Instagram, a big group, does vet chats live on Instagram. And she has, among other things, a monthly opinion piece in Task and Purpose. She recently wrote on the recruiting crisis, and that's particularly caught my attention and said, I got to talk to JENNA and get the view of a younger vet. Now, let me set this up, if you will, JENNA, and you can correct any mistakes I make. You were a nice Wisconsin girl graduating from high school, and you thought, I should join the Navy.
Yes, pretty much. I had an uncle who served, and he really talked me into it, said, you're going to see the world, you're going to get out of Wisconsin, and I was sold. I was excited to have a new experience.
So she served 4 years in the United States Navy from 2013 to 2017. Got out as a petty officer second class. You were, and I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody who was an aerographer's mate, and you deployed on the Harry S. Truman. Tell us what you did in that capacity.
Yes, so aerographer's mate is weather, meteorology, oceanography. So I was trained as an observer, a weather observer. So basically I told you what was going on now. And that's pretty important for pilots. They need to know where the ceilings are at for cloud levels, what the wind speed's at. So I did a lot of briefing pilots for on the carrier.
And that part of getting out of Wisconsin was to see the world. So did you get a chance to do that?
Yes, I did. Yep. On that deployment, we went to Dubai, we went to Greece, we went to Croatia, and we went to Bahrain. So I definitely got to see a lot of the world and It was a lot of fun.
You are not in Wisconsin anymore at that point.
No, far from it.
I always get a kick out of folks in the Navy because generally they're folks who were not on the ocean's edge. You know, somebody from Iowa or Nebraska or Illinois or Wisconsin makes it to the Navy. Now, at least Wisconsin, you say, well, I had a Great Lakes. I knew what water, big water was. But so it was an uncle who talked you into this. You still talking to him?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, one of the other things that you were able to do after the Navy, I assume, is use your GI Bill, and you picked up your bachelor's degree in public policy from St. Mary's College of Maryland in 2020. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Yep.
And as part of that, I think you got an internship at the House of Representatives, which probably helped ignite your interest in public policy.
Yes, it absolutely did. And that's where I got to really work with a lot of the public and a lot of veterans and hear a lot of, how policy is, how the sausage is made, as they say.
Yeah, some of that stuff you don't want to see because it's not very pretty. We're going to back up to her time on the carrier in a minute, but she's currently working at Naval Air Systems Command as a government employee. Has been doing that for a couple of years there. Do you want to explain briefly what that role's about?
Yes. So as you can see, the politic route did not work out. So I ended up working back for the Navy as a civilian, and I currently do contracts.
Okay. Well, I have to back up to this story because she told it to me before we got started and said it was okay to bring it on the air. So you met your future husband while you were on the Truman, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I met him in our last port, and this was in Greece. And, we were all dressed up for a friend's birthday, and me and one of my friends, we stepped out of the bar to get a breather, and we went down to another quiet bar. And as soon as this guy walked in with us, he said, I'll go somewhere quieter with you guys. So we walk into this other bar. He walks in with two pretty girls, and it was a British football team, soccer team, and they whistled at us girls. And my future husband, he said, hey, you can't do that to them. And they just jumped on him, and he got knocked out. He was bleeding, and then his friends came and took him away because if you served in the Navy, there's such thing as shore patrol. They're like police officers that are dressed as civilians, and they report on anyone misbehaving. So they took him away so he wouldn't get caught. And then I never got his last name, so I didn't see him the rest of the deployment. And then about 6 months later, we reunited at a going away party. I saw him there, and we started dating ever since.
Well, there's a 5-year-old daughter that's very thankful that you were on the Truman in Greece observing a bar fight so that you could connect with your future husband. And unfortunately, all too many folks who've been in the Navy or any sea service who've been away out on ship for a long time, you get into port and you maybe drink too much, and you got a lot of pent up energy. So I'm sure all of that was part of that evening, but it all worked out, didn't it?
It did. It was meant to be, I guess.
Well, you've taken those experiences from your Navy time and your time on the house and thought about how veterans of your generation are being treated or not treated, heard or not heard, and it really has launched you into this passion of being a veteran advocate. As I say, the Millennial Veteran is the name that you use on a lot of these sites. Talk to us about how that evolved and how it brings you to where you are today.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I did my internship, and then when I got out, I joined the local Legion, and I realized that I was the youngest one by about 20 years, me and my husband. And so when we'd come in, they would call us the Millennial Veterans. Oh, the young people are here. So it just got me wondering, where are all the younger veterans? I live in a I live near a base, so I figured there would be more out and about or wanting to be a part of something like the Legion. And then as the pandemic hit, I started reaching out online to other people that have gotten out and just trying to share advice on benefits or schooling. But so, yeah, that's kind of how I started my online thing, trying to get younger veterans involved, because I realized a lot of them don't realize they have a whole community and they have benefits that they can turn to. A lot of veterans like to isolate themselves.
It's very easy to feel you're the only one in this. Nobody else is going through what I'm going through. And nothing could be further from the truth. And part of that is about 30% of veterans have some sort of disability rating from VA, which means a big group of veterans, 70% or so, don't have those situations arise in their life. But it's real easy if you're in that 30% group or otherwise struggling in transition to think, well, I'm the only one who's never had a job, or I'm the only one who hates the job that I've gotten. And as you've talked to, literally thousands and interacted with thousands of younger veterans, what are some of the themes that you hear?
Yes, I hear a lot about isolation. I hear a lot of people who delay getting help. And I think every generation, all generations, we have the same problems since war has started, really coming back, re-entering into society, having injuries, either physical or mental. But I think what changes per generation is how you want to seek care. What do you want to remedy all these old age problems? And I think a lot of younger veterans are more open to mental health. And right now the VA just doesn't have that mental health care that matches the demand in the community. So that's something I've seen that's been kind of a bigger problem with younger veterans.
One of the also differences between, the Vietnam era, where I'm fit myself into, and today's veterans, is the increase in women who have served in the military and then become veterans. Any additional themes that you've heard from that cohort?
Yes, that's a great point, because the veteran community is becoming more female, and we need the VA to also reflect that. But yes, and we need to make sure women feel comfortable in these spaces, and just having more women involved will help change that.
Yeah, we now have more women in leadership positions, secretaries of state, commanders of the services, that sort of thing. So it really is hopefully changing and clearly for the better. As you've talked to folks and thought about these issues, it kind of led you to write this opinion piece on all of the services are missing their recruiting goals, and you can't keep doing that and have national security. So, Jenna, I guess I wanted to get your views on the recruiting problem that the military faces, and what kind of compelled you to write the opinion piece that you did on this issue from the point of a younger veteran?
Yes. So I went out to the Military Influencer Conference, and they had a panel, which I attended, and it was the VA press secretary. There's a lot of big names up there, the president of MOA, and they were talking about, how veterans should share their stories and be involved in helping the recruiting crisis, which, it's a great sentiment, and I wish it was that easy, but I couldn't help but thinking about sometimes the hardest part of serving is the aftermath and the lifelong injuries that our veterans are living with, and sometimes that's the the most painful part is continuing your life after service with these life-altering injuries and not being helped, which you were promised to be helped through the VA. And so I kind of took the opinions of when I worked in Congress, and I would get folks of the Vietnam era calling in, needing help but not qualifying due to different parameters. And then also the messages that I get daily from people who have served, especially women who have had MST, and just all those opinions were swirling in my head. And I was like, I got to say something, I think a lot of us would love to advocate about the great experiences, but also we can't just ignore the pain that it's caused. So that's really where I was writing from.
And you see this reflected in studies done by the RAND Corporation, or IAVA just came out with a survey of women warriors this summer, and I got a chance to talk to Allison Jaslow, their president and CEO over that. You still have 50 or 70%, depending on the stats, of people recommending that, would you recommend to your family members, friends, that they consider joining the military? And I'm kind of surprised by that number sometimes, because it's not for everybody. And particularly, we, just coming out of a 20-year war, hopefully we're not going back into anything. It's a different type of service if you're not in a war. But so many people don't serve at the front line. Everybody's got these different experiences, and I suppose I'm interested if you think overall younger veterans would be much lower than 50% approval of or recommendation of going into the military.
Oh, yeah, I would be curious to know that as well, especially for, younger veterans are having less deployments. They're not going to have that combat experience as other generations. But still, I think the most harmful thing is what I hear the most is just the culture of the military. And I've had people reach out to me that have served of all eras and say, yes, I've seen such a shift in just how military leadership is. And I think that's one of the biggest pain points, is just that disconnect between leadership and, creating a culture of, being able to reach out for help, or just better communication all around.
Yeah, the military is a big organization, and if you work for any big organization, communications from the top down is always a challenge, and seems like it always gets changed as it keeps working its way down. But one of the things you said in your opinion piece was that you felt many of the younger veterans were given unrealistic expectations of what our military service would be like. Are you referring to what the recruiter told you, or the image that's, your uncle or Hollywood or something else put in your head is about how this would be in the Navy?
I'm referring to all of it, just how society portrays service, even recruiters, of course, they're going to tell you anything to get you to sign.
Yeah, you can't believe a thing they tell you. That's what I tell everybody who asks. Take whatever the recruiter says with a grain of salt.
Oh, absolutely. And definitely Hollywood. They put this image, you're doing a heroic thing. You're going to be changing the world. When I joined, the Navy slogan, what they were pushing was a global fight for good. So I really thought that I was out there, maintaining that. And I think a lot of us are kind of fed that image. And then when you join, you realize, okay, maybe America's not the shining hero that I thought it was. I witnessed a lot of terrible things the military accidentally did to other countries. And you're just putting things in perspective in that way, which is, it's kind of hard to come to terms with.
Some of this is the difference between being 19-year-olds and being late 20s, right? I mean, hasn't your world view just evolved?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's very true. And most of us, we join at 18, 19, you're joining at that age. And so, once you get in there and you see it for what it is, It's something you gotta deal with. I call it. Everyone has mixed feelings about their service in that way.
One of the other things you write about, and I think this, I'm curious as to a younger veteran's view on the transition out of service. You know, back in the day, the word transition didn't exist. You were in and one day out the next. Hopefully you could find some civvies to wear. But there seems to be a bigger emphasis on recognizing that there does need to be a transition out. But as you point out, the first year out is when the risk of suicide is highest. Are we doing enough in transition and getting people ready for it, for that big change in lifestyle?
I think we're doing great in, there's a lot of career avenues because, you're not going to get out and it's really hard to meet that same paycheck. I think they're pretty practical on that. But when it comes to the identity piece or how you're going to fit into society, I think we're sugarcoating that a little bit. And I can just tell by I do a lot of short little clips on Instagram, and I have people reaching out to me all the time saying, I thought I was the weirdo. I thought I was, so alone. I thought there was something wrong with me, on why I didn't fit in or why I couldn't get myself together after the military. So I think we just need to be more honest and understand that, yes, being tough and being mission oriented and all those things that helped us in the military aren't necessarily going to help us in the civilian world. And we just need to start having more conversations like that.
Yeah, you used the word identity, which I think's pretty interesting because you have a certain identity when you're in uniform, right? And when you come home and you see your friends and they know what you're doing, you have this identity exists, and maybe it's blown up a little bit, but it exists. When you get out, you no longer have that identity. A word I like to use is purpose. You have to have a purpose too in life, otherwise you do sit on the couch, wallow, and think about things like harming yourself, which you shouldn't do. Is that a little bit of what we're not helping veterans with enough, is to have them realize it's going to take some time to have a new identity, to find a new purpose, to find the right job? We all think this is going to happen immediately, don't we?
Right. Yes, that's so important because so much of our identity in the military, society puts us kind of on a pedestal, like they're out there, they're fighting for us, you're doing something good with your job. And then you get out and I went from, being in the Navy to being a college kid, and they're one of the most, looked at as like entitled people. So it was just hard to go from military personnel to college, or, some people are getting out and having to take a lower paying job, and it kind of messes with you. It's like, what's my purpose? What's my next mission looking like now? And I just think we could be more honest about how that's going to affect us, because I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced that.
This is, just Jim's experience from years of talking to folks about this transition issue. And look, I hear her. How good is that?
My 2-year-old just came home too. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. And my thought is that we're not honest with folks, or we don't pass on what we've learned. And it takes about, honestly, 6 years after you get out to go through. Maybe it's some more college or education. Maybe it's 2 or 3 lousy jobs before you figure out the one you really like. It doesn't happen in the first year or second year or third year. It may take 6 years before you go, man, I really feel solid now. Have you experienced that at all? Have you heard from folks who said, yeah, those first couple of years were horrible, but I really feel like I'm grounded now?
Yes. And I get that question a lot. People are like, how long does it take? They want to know how long does it take for you to go through this transition phase? And I'm like, it's different for everyone. Absolutely. I think 6 years is a good number, more realistic than what people plan on, like 6-month adjustment period. I think we need to give ourselves more time and a lot more understanding. It is a process, and it's not going to be an overnight thing.
And not only do we veterans have to give that timeline in ourselves more patience and more allowance for the time to go by, but we also have to communicate that to our family. Because whether it's mom or dad or uncle or a spouse, they're all thinking like, man, what's taking so long? And the reality of it is it just takes a long time, and it is different for everybody. And I'm just picking the number that I kind of have played with folks in the past to get there. And I think both the veteran and his or her circle of friends and family have to understand it. And I don't think they do. Do you?
No, and it's something, you're right. I think we need to remind military personnel as they're getting out to identify that support system and, say those phrases like, hey, I'm going to be different. I'm not the person who left for the military. I was 18 at that time, and now I'm coming back. I'm not going to be the same person. I think a lot of families get frustrated with that, or even, they're not used to them being around as much. So it can create issues, but yeah, they'll never fully understand. But they can have more compassion for you during that time.
Yeah,
that's great to communicate.
Yeah, that's what you're looking for, is just a little more compassion from those folks who want to be helpful, but they just sometimes don't know how and don't really realize how long it's going to take, because you got a lot of stuff to sort out, finding your new identity, finding your new purpose. So as we wrap up, we're talking to Jenna CARLTON. She is the Millennial Veteran on Facebook and Instagram. Jenna, give our veteran radio listeners some idea of how they can follow along on what you're doing.
Yes, so I'm most active over on Instagram, and I also we also have a weekly podcast that comes out Sundays at 9 is when we're live on Instagram, and then I usually have it posted Monday morning on the podcast. I also have a workbook that I self-published for veterans to kind of work through a lot of the things we just talked about, finding community, that purpose after service, diving into your new identity and really setting yourself up for the next chapter the best way you can. And you could find a link to that also on my Instagram.
Well,
I'm also on LinkedIn, but I'm not as consistent over there.
And you have a Facebook, the Millennial Veteran has a Facebook site as well that seems fairly active.
Yep, we have a Facebook group, and we have a lot of chats in there. People are always online, which is good because, I encourage people to reach out if you're feeling isolated or lonely. Someone's always going to be active on there and be able to talk to you.
Well, we appreciate everything that you're doing for our veterans. Certainly a nice Wisconsin girl went to the Navy, found a husband in Greece, and now has 2 chatty daughters. That's great. And and we're glad for all that you're doing out there and spending a little time with Veterans Radio today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jim. It's been such a pleasure.
So there's a view from our younger veterans from the Navy in this particular case, touching on a lot of issues from recruiting to transition to VA health care for women and mental health availability. So good to hear that perspective. Let's have a few words from our sponsors.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
Military veterans touch everyone's life. I'm guessing right now you're thinking of a veteran, a close friend, relative. Maybe it's you. Even the toughest of us sometimes need help, but don't know where to turn for support. You don't need special training to help a veteran in your life. Even small actions can make a world of difference. If you know a veteran in crisis, please call the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. A message from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today two retired Navy officers, Vice Admiral Kevin Green and Captain Bruce Lemkin. Admiral, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thanks very much. Happy to be with you, Jim.
And Captain, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be here, and good to have my classmate, Admiral Kevin Green, on with us.
Yeah, let me set this up a little bit. Both of these gentlemen graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1971, and they are both fellows currently with the American College of National Security Leaders. And we have them on not because both of them have really interesting military careers, which we're going to let them describe in brief momentarily, but we really want to talk about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary, and they have some viewpoints on that. So, Admiral, why don't you give us the thumbnail of your military career?
Sure. Again, graduated Naval Academy. I served principally in destroyers during my career, and rode on aircraft carriers at sea late in my career, both as a destroyer squadron commander and as a battle group commander. My final military assignment was as the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Plans, Policy, and Operations, which brought me very close to NATO, which had been a central thread of my career and professional relationships throughout my time in uniform.
Yeah, it's a fascinating career. We could spend the whole time on that. And similarly, Captain Lemkin, Bruce, why don't you tell us about your career in the nuclear submarine field?
Sure, and again, thank you for having us today. I'm a Naval Academy graduate, as well as you said. I was selected by Admiral Rickover to serve in the nuclear submarine program, served in 6 nuclear submarines, including command of the USS Hyman G. Rickover, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine, and USS Michigan, then was a Trident ballistic missile submarine. All my shore duty was in the Pentagon, and a lot of time on the Navy staff as well as the Joint Staff. Retired in '99 and was asked, since I had been negotiating with North Korea, to lead our negotiations on implementing the 1994 agreed framework to dismantle North Korea's nuclear weapons program. That worked out great, didn't it? I then came back into government early in the Bush administration, and served through some of the Obama administration for 8.5 years. The last 7 years as the Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs. I did a lot of work with NATO during that time frame, and while I had done operational work with NATO, most of which I can't talk about when I was a submariner, I was involved in a broad array of support for NATO, both policy and ensuring that NATO had the interoperable aerospace capabilities to partner with us against common threats.
And we have both of you guys on, as I said earlier, you're fellows of the American College of National Security Leaders. Admiral, why don't you tell us what that organization is?
Well, first of all, it's a nonpartisan organization. We don't take a partisan political stance on any of the issues we cover, but we take advantage of the hundreds and hundreds of years of professional experience on the part of our members, who are retired generals, admirals, senior defense and State Department officials, including quite a number of ambassadors, who are focused on national security and other critical issues facing the United States. We attend and take part in conferences. We do a lot of writing. We speak as well. And our focus is entirely on the security and future of the United States in what appears to be an increasingly dangerous world.
Yeah, I think everybody would agree that just on the nightly news, you see how things are getting more dangerous all around the world, whether it's China or Korea or Russia or Ukraine. And that sort of gets us to the central reason we're talking, and that we're approaching the 75th anniversary of NATO. And both of these gentlemen are big thinkers. We're not going to ask them where they graduated at the Naval Academy. You know, I'm sure they were 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, but in any event, they're big thinkers. They've got all this great experience. Bruce, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the history of NATO and what you see as the value of NATO?
Yes, thank you. So NATO was founded 75 years ago, the wake of the end of World War II. And, you know, that was such a huge conflict that required a lot of blood, sweat, tears, national treasure, however you want to put it. And there was a feeling that we needed to ensure this wouldn't happen again. Similar to what we said after World War I. World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, and then lo and behold, 20 years later, we were in World War II. And the rise of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Bloc, really provided an incentive for European nations to unite for the common defense. And of course, U.S. leadership was essential, and this also was in parallel with the Marshall Plan, where the U.S. did so much to ensure the revival of the economic health of Europe, particularly Western Europe. The military aspect was very important in NATO, and General Eisenhower was the first supreme Allied commander of Europe, and hence the NATO commander. And NATO has continued to grow. It's continued to demonstrate its relevance and value, and evolve and transform as the situation in the world has changed. Whether it was the demise of the Soviet Union, and then, of course, some time after that, the rise of another adversarial, Russia, and also the rise of transnational terrorism and threats throughout the Middle East, and actually, of course, globally. And we are all globally interdependent, whether it's security-wise, defense, economics, etc. So NATO has continued to be relevant, as I said, and its relevance today, I would say, is probably greater than it ever has been. And now we've got 32 members, with the exception of Finland and Sweden into the alliance. And if we can just go back to 9/11, the attack on the terrorist attack on the United States in 2001 was the first time that Article 5 of the NATO Charter was implemented. An attack on one is an attack on all. Again, I could think of nothing more illustrative of how effective this alliance is.
Well, let me jump in there, because I think that's what, people's knowledge of history is short, and their even memory of the current events is pretty limited. Admiral, when we look at NATO today and the terrorist threats, talk to us a little bit, Kevin, about how valuable it is to have NATO from the viewpoint of the American College of National Security Leaders.
Sure, Jim. Let's just begin with a recognition of a central fact. The primary mission of NATO is collective defense and deterrence against potential aggression against any of its members, wherever those threats occur and exist. When we look at the situation, you mentioned Ukraine, and if you live in Eastern or Central Europe and you're a neighbor to Ukraine, Well, pick a country. Pick Poland, for example. You find yourself in the role as a first responder in the event that Russia moves further beyond the borders of Ukraine. Russia, if it should threaten the Baltic states, Poland itself, or any of the other countries within the NATO alliance, Poland is truly a first responder. And how do we back up Poland? We back it up with the rest of NATO. We back it up logistically with troops, with weapons, with the whole panoply of capabilities that the NATO nations provide and carry out. We in the United States are far away. It takes some time for us to send materials and troops and so forth, if they're not already in Europe, to be able to respond in the event that an invasion or a movement further western in the western direction takes place. But even more crucially is the issue of deterrence. What's the message to those who would threaten the NATO nations? And that message is NATO is strong, NATO is unified, NATO is ready, NATO is capable, and no attack on the alliance is going to succeed. That's really what this is all about.
So let me bring up a couple of contra issues. I suppose you only get little snippets of this on the general news, but at times it seems American leaders complain that everybody in NATO is not carrying their weight in terms of contribution, whether it be financial or military resources. How do you respond to that kind of comment, Captain Lemkin?
Yeah, it depends on how you hold the lights and mirrors on that and how you interpret that. In 2014, NATO established what was really is an aspirational policy that each country strive to commit 2% of its gross domestic product for its military. Not a price of admission, but again, it's a target. And this year, 18 of the 31 NATO members are expected to meet that objective. That's a record. But that's just the money aspect. Go back to in the wake of 9/11 and Operation Enduring Freedom and the and ISAF and the International Security Force that was mustered to deal with the terrorist threat that emanated from Afghanistan. Virtually every member of NATO at the time participated and suffered losses. So this wasn't, yes, U.S. paid the greatest price, certainly in terms of our losses, the human losses. That said, this was a collective effort, and just as Admiral Green mentioned, about collective security. And ultimately, that spells deterrence. The mission is to ensure we are ready. We are ready collectively as an alliance, and that will provide a deterrent against any adversary that would attack a NATO member or its interests elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, and we tend to focus just on things going on in Europe, but there are threats all over the world, and being able to work cooperatively with other countries seems extremely important, doesn't it, Admiral Green?
Absolutely, and when we talk about providing security for member nations of NATO, as an alliance, the nation's interests go beyond the military. Of course, it goes to the ability to travel and trade and communicate across the globe. And if there are threats that exist somewhere other than the European landmass or the adjoining waters, then absolutely. I mean, we had thousands and thousands of NATO troops in Afghanistan. We had We had their capabilities across the span of the military systems, programs, and capabilities that they possess. Not anything new about that, really. My initial exposure to NATO was in the summer of 1970 on a West German torpedo boat up in the North Sea, and doing NATO's job in a 135-foot boat against the East Germans and the Soviets and the Poles. And when I would talk with the officers about where are we doing this, it's the point all those years ago was about demonstrating the readiness of NATO, not just the readiness of West Germany, but the readiness of NATO to respond to anything that could be perceived as a threat against the alliance. That point never left my mind.
Well, and Admiral, that requires training and the ability to communicate and cross-country planning. I mean, it's really a big issue to get that degree of cooperation, isn't it?
Absolutely is, and that's why we, within the NATO community, we have officer exchange programs. The ships that I served on had NATO officers from Italy, from Germany, from other countries as well. And we fully man our positions on the NATO staffs. And it is a very smoothly running organization in terms of planning, in terms of political considerations, in terms of readiness, and the technical side as well.
And Captain, it seems to me that you kind of have to look at NATO on the other side of the coin. Some people say the United States ought to be an isolationist, just worry about your own stuff and not everybody else's involvement. But by being in NATO, it's a force multiplier, isn't it, Bruce?
Well, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought this up, because our collective memory sometimes is somewhat fuzzy. Our fathers, certainly my father, fought in World War II in Europe. Our grandfathers, both my grandfathers, fought in Europe in World War I. And then you look at, so are we going to learn those lessons? NATO deters the next war in Europe, which might not start in Europe. If deterrence fails, we will not be fighting alone. This also gets to another issue that I've heard people say, or address, or question. And I've had people say to me, well, why do we have troops in Germany to defend Germany? Why can't they defend themselves? Well, as part of the alliance, of course, we're working on our interoperability and our collective security. But there's another aspect. We're over there, so the war does not come over here. We will deter the conflict in Europe just as we do in South Korea and Japan and other areas of the world. So we can't stand alone and survive in what is truly a global world. And that's a lesson that we have to keep reminding ourselves of.
No, I think you're right, and you touched on something I'm going to ask the Admiral to comment on, and that is this idea that a war may start in Europe or may not start in Europe while something's going on over in the Pacific with China and Taiwan or North Korea. You need to be able to have defense and deterrence really all around the world if you're the United States. How does this come into play as you think about it as related to NATO?
Well, I will just repeat something that a former chief of naval operations used to talk about, and that's when asked about the size of the U.S. fleet, he said, well, the fleet of the United States and our allies is about 1,000 ships altogether. The whole notion of fighting alone or deterring alone, probably more importantly, is bankrupt today. We need to work closely with our allies. We need to make sure that they're ready. that we are fully interoperable across the every capability that we have with regard to intelligence, with regard to equipping, with regard to weapon systems, with regard to communications. We need to practice together, and that's true everywhere in the world. There is no better model, however, with regard to peacetime military alliances than NATO. And after all, NATO has been successful for 75 years in doing just that, in deterring major combat in Europe that would spread elsewhere. We have been somewhat less successful in other parts of the world for lack of other kinds of alliances that can be so helpful to us.
Yeah, over time, those alliances and the connections that are made and the bonds that are made not only between the military members but also the civilian governments just get stronger and stronger, doesn't it, Bruce?
Oh, absolutely. And, the ability to communicate, the ability to be interoperable, and interoperability is a concept that many people don't understand, and that's understandable because it's not something they have to live with. It's not about being able to talk to one another if you're flying different aircraft or in ships that were manufactured in different places. It's about understanding each other, about training together, operating together. So if you need to, you can fight together as one. And that's what NATO does better than any other arrangement, security arrangement, alliance or otherwise.
Admiral, why don't we wrap up here? You're wearing your hat as a fellow of the American College of National Security Leaders. I think Captain Lemkin just gave us a good closing remark from his end, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to do the same.
Well, I thank you, Jim, and all I would say is simply to reiterate that we need to be very thoughtful about the friends that we make, the friends that we value, all of whom have something to contribute to our security. Most people can figure out how to fight a fire. Most people can figure out how to deter a burglar, let's say. But there's nothing like a professional, and the professionals of our NATO partners at the scene of where a conflict could erupt someday is a warming and reassuring thought. We need to be sure that we are the kind of partners that contribute to our joint security, to our combined security, and understand that it is a very dangerous world. It seems to be becoming more dangerous as time goes on. We need to think twice before we decide to look away from those kinds of arrangements and capabilities that are going to protect us and the lives and futures of our children and grandchildren. NATO is part of that.
Well, we really appreciate the time that Vice Admiral Kevin Green and retired and Captain Bruce Lemkin, retired from the Navy, have given us as fellows of the American College of National Security Leaders to talk about NATO and its 75th anniversary here. Gentlemen, thank you for participating with Veterans Radio today.
Thanks, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the great work that you do, and we appreciate this opportunity.
Well, there's the viewpoint of a couple of old salty dogs from the Navy on NATO. I think instructive. Sorry about the sound quality there. Both of these gentlemen, having worked in the military for so long, have bad hearing and have hearing aids, I think, probably supplied by the VA. And we couldn't figure out how to get the squeal out of that soundtrack as well as allowing them to hear. We tried ahead of time, but if they took their hearing aids out, they couldn't hear the questions. So I guess that's about as true veteran-orientated as you can get. So we can't bring you these stories, these interesting insights from men and women who've had military careers without the help of our sponsors. And we want to thank our veteran service organizations, Vietnam Veterans of America, Charles S. Kettle's Chapter 310 in Ann Arbor, the VFW Graf O'Hare Post 423, and the American Legion Post 46. If you're out there and you think, hey, my local post could help out a little bit, sponsor a little bit, we would certainly appreciate you contacting us. Go to veteransradio.org or send an email to Dale@veteransradio.org to say, hey, you guys do really good work, and I'd like to help out a little bit by making a regular contribution, a sponsorship, or maybe it's a one-off. Maybe you have a foundation or a fund that could help us. So this is a nonprofit. Nobody's getting big dollars out of this, but we do bring it forward as a passion project every week. And every week we also post a fresh new podcast, which you can find on our website. That's done on Tuesdays. The Sunday programs generally get posted on Monday. And so there's always something interesting to listen to. We try to bring it to you without a whole lot of politics and puffery, but instead the stories of veterans, the viewpoints of veterans, and let that material stand on its own. And I think it really does. So often I go back into the legacy archives here and listen to something we did months or years ago because it's relevant again today. Something else is in the news. And we want to thank our national sponsor, National Veteran Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, that's been so faithful to us over all these years. I'm Jim Faussone. As I said, I was the officer of the deck today and proud to bring you this program, and also a veterans disability lawyer. Dale Throneberry will be back next week with some interesting stories to tell. But if you've got some, if you say, hey, I haven't heard this on the airwaves yet, reach out to us. Send that email to Dale@veteransradio.org. Give us the name of somebody you want interviewed or the organization that needs to be highlighted for the good work that it's doing in the veteran space. Or maybe it's a problem that you have that needs to be solved and we can tackle it on our monthly Veterans Benefit Program where we talk both health care and VA disability benefits. So this is your program. This is your Veterans Radio, and we really appreciate your involvement. And until next time on Veterans Radio, you are dismissed.